All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Maybe good morning or even good evening for some of you. A big welcome to today's webinar, which is going to be about unbiased graduate recruitment, traineeship hiring. We're going to have this webinar today together with Dennis. So Dennis, I will ask you to introduce yourself in a second. Maybe quick intro from my side before I hand it over to you. My name is Charlotte. I am one of the founders of Equalture. We are an HR tech company based in Rotterdam in the Netherlands. And we're basically on a mission to shape the world of unbiased hiring. So what we do with our platform is we develop games, small mini games measuring a candidate's soft skills, behavioral preferences, all those kinds of things that candidates play at the very start of the hiring funnel, with the goal to make sure that if you evaluate your candidates, that you do that in an equal manner based on scientific insights, and therefore providing everyone with an equal opportunity to showcase themselves. But enough about Equalture now, because that's not what we're going to talk about today. Dennis, super happy to have you on the webinar today. Could you I would assume that most people know FrieslandCampina, but still, would you be able to introduce yourself and FrieslandCampina?
Yeah, sure. So my name is Dennis Damoiseaux. I'm now exactly 1 year within the company, responsible for actually 4 products. So we divided the product teams within supply chain, what actually all the recruiters who are responsible for 24 locations in the Netherlands, so all our plants. Then we have a corporate office team for all the corporate office functions and support mainly in Amersfoort and Wageningen. That's where our R&D center is. Then we have an early career sourcing and employee branding team. And at the end, we have candidate services back office, what's actually located in Wolfga. Makes a complete team of almost 50 people, whereby we did a kind of a record last year in 2022, where we hired almost 1,700 people.
Wow.
Still a lot of vacancies to go for this year. So hopefully we don't break that record. The last, I would say, 11, 12 years always in recruitment, employer branding and sourcing, from consulting, banking, FMCG, a lot of organizations. That's a little bit about me, I think. And FrieslandCampina, where you said a lot of people know it. Hopefully we can turn it a little bit around in a positive way, because people have seen us last year potentially differently. But well, let's continue in the conversation later on.
Yeah, because it's funny because well, you became one of our customers, of course, not too long ago, and I still remember that when you started talking about FrieslandCampina, all the different things you do, that it's so much more than the average. Well, I'm Dutch, but like the average Dutch person, or maybe the average international who hears about FrieslandCampina actually knows about the company. Let's dive into that in a second. Before I forget to mention it, in the lower right corner of your screen, for everyone who's joining, there is a chat functionality, and there's also a questions tab. If you do have a question during the webinar, then please make sure to put it in there. And if you just have a comment that you would like to make, then please put it in the chat section. And then I will make sure to, or I will try to make sure that we answer all the questions that you might have in this 30 minutes that we have. Small introduction of why we are having this webinar today, why we picked this specific topic. We're going to talk about graduate hiring, especially traineeship hiring. And of course, when we are talking about traineeship hiring, I immediately link that to Gen Zs. Gen Zs is going to be, well, they already represent quite a high percentage of the labor force. But by the end of this decade, by 2030, they almost present 1/3 of the total labor force. So Gen Zs are going to have quite an impact on the labor force, and therefore also how we should hire people. This is an interesting research from Glassdoor. And one of the findings from the research is that over 80% of all Gen Z's candidates said that if they want to work for a company, they would consider if the company has a clear D&I strategy, if the company provides fair opportunities for hiring, and if they have the feeling that that's not happening, then they might actually choose a different employer. And last but not least, a big trend in the market has nothing to do with Gen Zs, but does have a big impact. I can imagine Dennis also in your team. Is that we are facing a huge talent shortage. And according to the United Nations, in the coming 30 years, that's only going to get worse. They actually expect that by 2050, we have almost 100 million fewer people in the labor force. So we are getting more and more jobs, but at the same time, it's getting harder and harder to find people for those jobs. And then last but not least, if we focus specifically on traineeships, because that's of course what we are going to discuss today. I speak with a lot of companies about traineeship hiring, and I'm super happy again, Dennis, to have you today, because I think FrieslandCampina has a very refreshing thought on traineeship hiring, and you have the willingness to actually change the way you hire trainees. But what I do see a lot in the market is that companies basically say that if they're hiring trainees, they're looking for people with a specific educational background and maybe certain behaviors that are desirable. But if you really look behind the scenes at what most hiring managers would judge candidates on, it's so much more than that. It's about specific education. Did you live a year abroad? Did you join a study association? Did you have relevant traineeships? All those kinds of things that make it super hard for people to get that traineeship in the first place. So that was a nice link to why I really wanted to invite you here today for this webinar. Why, Dennis, do you have traineeships at all within FrieslandCampina at the moment?
Yeah, so on the moment we have two cohorts each year around traineeships, management traineeships with, at the end, the hope that they become a manager, director, or potentially even a CEO. So let's say you are a management trainee in a plant. We hope in a couple of years that you become a plant director. And we have 24 plants in the Netherlands with all different kind of types. So you can grow really rapidly from a small one to a medium to a bigger one to a more important one. And that's a chain that we believe in. Only what we have seen in the last few years, and based on data, is there's a different trend with younger people. Is in the past people would probably stay within 7-10 years within FrieslandCampina. Mm-hmm. On the moment, after 2-4 years, we see a huge drop down of 50% of people who started. What we see as well is people leaving between 0 and 2 years. That's almost 17-18%. And definitely in younger people. So I think the younger generation, they are not staying anymore as probably our parents for 40 or 50 years. For example, my mother-in-law, she's 42 years at the same company.
Oh, wow.
And that's quite unique. So what we said when we saw the data is that we wanted to change our hiring process and to see if we could hire differently, change the mindset of the people within the company. And that's where we started the first conversation, I think, somewhere before the summer with you guys is. And now we are on this step that we even changing it to the final step is that we're not going to use CVs anymore in the selection on selection day. So I think that's a big step forward in the whole graduate recruitment for FrieslandCampina.
Yeah, wow, I see an emoji now flowing through my screen after you said that. Didn't know that functionality existed in this platform. Hey, because you mentioned it already, like you are even going to a selection not based on CVs anymore. We, of
Correct.
course, know each other now since, I think, June last year. So quite a lot has changed in the meantime. Could you walk me through, and especially the people that are listening, of course, through what traineeship hiring looked like at FrieslandCampina, let's say a year ago?
I think we were like kind of the traditional, let's say, big 50 companies in the Netherlands. if we would post a vacancy, we would get a lot of applications. So it was kind of a luxury for us as well to choose the best based on GDP, based on outcome of a selection day, a capacity test that someone would do, and a bias interview. We would make a decision because it was really biased on past performance of people. A huge impact what we have seen over the last, I would say, 1.5, 2 years with the CO2 emission, but also the farmers. The farmers don't have really a good stamp on the moment in the Netherlands. However, what a lot of people don't know is that we do way more in FrieslandCampina than only working with farmers and milk. So if you eat, for example, Valais, what is a vegetarian burger, we sell it to McDonald's in the Netherlands. But also in Veghel, for example, paracetamol, well, is a part of milk. But also baby powder is based on milk. So there are a lot of things that we make that our audience, so definitely young people, don't have a knowledge about. But it's and that's what we want to change as well in our marketing, in telling to the people in the Netherlands, is that we are not only that traditional company where we make milk or yogurt and that's what we sell. No, we do a lot more. But also the internal mindset on hiring. So a lot of people put a mirror in front of them and say, this is what I want. And potentially it's someone like themselves. And that's what we want to challenge. So the first conversation was, okay, can we change the assessment? So we went from a traditional assessment to the gamification. There we saw at the end that almost 80% of the people who did the assessment, we hire them as a trainee. They're going to start, I think, this month or next month. And for the next start rate of the gamification. And then a hiring manager on selection day will only get the outcome of the gamification. And then they really need to do a proper interview with someone. And I think that's a big difference than having a CV, which you said as well. So you read the CV the evening before, you see, oh, this person only did an internship at a Big Four and was at a student committee. So probably he or she should be really good, instead of someone who maybe worked during Corona on something else. So you're really biased. So with that, what I mean is a lot of people are still sitting in an interview like, okay, I have this job and why you? No, it should be also vice versa. So hiring managers should sell a job in first 10 minutes, I would say, also to a potential candidate. And that's the mindset and the shift that we want to make.
Yeah. So basically, if I would quickly summarize it, a year ago it was like, I think most other companies do it right now. So it's CV based, cover letter based, indeed focused on the things such as average degrees, those kind of things. Then you move to making gamification a part of the application, and then the next step is replacing the CV by gamification. That's a fair summary, right? Yeah, check.
Yeah.
Hey, and I think that a lot of people who are in this webinar today will think, okay, that sounds super cool. That sounds like a bold move you're making. But how are you going to deal with that internally with all the different hiring managers involved? Because it requires quite a lot of change management to change such a deep-rooted habit within the organization. What have you seen are the best practices that you could share here?
Yeah, so internally, I think we started at the top, and that's where we shared it with 2 HR directors, where we hire, I think, the most people to get their buy-in, to really sell it to them, and that they drive it. Then we try to get more stakeholders and confront them actually with that they are really biased. So during a meeting, they said, no, we are completely not biased. We always do this interview openly. We do this already for years, etc. And then we really challenge them on, but what kind of questions do you ask? What preparation are you doing? And learning, actually, am I quite biased with my selection and interview way? So during those kind of meetings and interventions, you also joined, I think, 2 or 3 of those interventions with hiring managers and our stakeholders, is to really convince them that we don't have anything to lose. So let's try something new. Let's build on a future base, potentially hire in a different way of hiring, because the market is changing. And that's something what we see not only in graduate recruiting, we see that completely overall in FrieslandCampina. So if we compare 2021 and 2022 with, then we did almost 200% more hires. So changing quicker and faster. Environment is important, work-life balance is important, and you need to adapt as a company and your way of working in your hiring process.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, Kobe is asking a nice question for you on the chat. Did you use any specific metrics to influence the key stakeholders? And I think the key stakeholders here are then indeed the C-level and the hiring managers.
A little bit old-fashioned sales, I would say. Is no, it's really confronting them with figures and numbers in the market. So if I look back in when I started a year ago, we had a forecast that we should do, for example, 700 hires in 2022. Well, I just mentioned we did 1,700. I don't say that's a mismatch, but it's a completely change of the market for us in 2022. So with those figures and numbers, we challenge really our stakeholders and also the board to make really decisions. And the funny part now is probably in next month you will see the results of FrieslandCampina, and in the last, so Q2 and Q4, when our CFO was presenting the figures and the numbers, talent acquisition was on there. And that's the big change that we're going through, because talent is really important, because otherwise the plants are not producing what they should produce. And that's a big difference.
Yeah, absolutely. I now see that actually more questions have been asked me. Well, sorry guys, we're missing that. It's funny because I'm probably the most chaotic person in this company, and somehow I'm always hosting the webinars. Tim is asking, can you challenge hard? Okay, it's a question about Equalture. Let's do that quickly then, because I don't want to talk too much about our company specifically. But can you challenge hard skills with Equalture? Is it more focused on testing soft skills? Well, I can answer that one for you, Tim. That's soft skills. So let's say more transferable skills. So more your cognitive abilities, behavioral characteristics, those kinds of things. So it's very much focused on potential rather than specific experiences. So no coding test, for example.
To go on the last question of Ines. So what we are doing at the moment is a benchmark on how do young people look at us. So we do a benchmark and an assessment. We do that with an external company to assess us and to look at us like, how does the market look at FrieslandCampina? We do that by category, so that we know like how do finance people look at us, how do supply chain or e-commerce or IT people look at FrieslandCampina. So with that info, we want to make a new EVP, like how to target those people, how to get them in, but also how to keep them happy, because retention rate, what we said as well, is it's changing. The younger generation are not staying anymore for 10 years in a traineeship and then they do a management role, etc. So this is for us really, I would say, the upcoming months, a huge deep dive. Okay, what are we going to do with the whole graduate recruitment and traineeship? Because we need to make a decision on if we see people leaving within 4 years or let's say 50% of the people leaving in 4 years, that's quite of an expensive hire. So this half year, we will have a huge challenge internally on, okay, what kind of people are there in the market? How do they look at FrieslandCampina? How can we target them? How can we get them in? How can we get the best people in with Equalture as a tooling, unbiased recruitment, and then at the end, how can we keep them, and how can we keep them happy? It's a lot of info, I think, but at the end, it makes completely sense for us to take this all in consideration in whole graduate recruitment.
Yeah, definitely. Hey, something that might also be interesting to quickly touch upon. Something that we did for you guys, of course, is an internal benchmark. That's something that any tool in the world can, by the way, do for companies. So that doesn't make us special above other tools. But something that I've seen a lot with our customers that are hiring for trainees is that oftentimes, well, if you look at the CV requirements, then it's already like completely unrealistic given the market conditions. But then if they are going to focus more on, well, let's say, for example, the behavioral skills or the cognitive skills like learning ability, problem solving, whatever. What I do see a lot is that people also then have very unrealistic expectations of what is good enough for the company, let's say. Could you tell a little bit more about the team benchmark that you did internally?
Can you rephrase that one again, that I understand it correctly?
Yeah, the fact that we analyzed your existing workforce in order to basically come to that set of criteria.
Like that. We took the past, so how were people performing, and then we evaluate on what is good. So that's the benchmark that we are doing on the moment, even a deep dive. So what we did is looking at ratings over years. So we have this talent rating matrix from you are concerned to a top leader. And then you have core talent, expert potential, and growth potential. So we want to know who's a future leader for us and who is actually doing okay. When are people leaving? When are people happy? And with that kind of info, we try to come to the, I would say, the ideal candidate, but also from the assessment tooling that we still use, but that's basically on numbers and facts, what everyone can train. That's completely different than when you do a gamification, for example, or if you do an interview with no CV, because then you need to tell something and you need to sell yourself as well. That's not only for us a change, but it's also a big change for candidates. So we ask as well feedback after the last cohort. What we did with you guys is, how did you experience the whole gamification, the process, etc.? And I thought we scored 4.4 out of 5 stars. So I would say quite good. Really happy with that outcome. Same is the numbers of hires. What we did, we are also confident that that's the best what we could do. And that's why we're doing this huge transformation on the moment. Okay, what is still value for us in the future around graduate recruitment, hiring, tooling, etc., etc.
No.
I see also a question from Ines again, like, what do you know about young people? Well, that's a big question.
Why do young people job hop more?
Yeah, I can't speak for other companies. If I look at FrieslandCampina, well, we are a large company in the Netherlands with almost 10,000 people. And what we see is that the culture, but also the shock sometimes of a plant, is the plant did not always change over the last 20, 30, 40 years. It's still a plant. where we make something, I would say. But why are they more job hopping? It's a big question. I think people, the conversation that we had a couple of weeks ago with as well the company doctor as external parties is the expectations. So that's something that we really take under the loop in the moment is if someone is joining, the expectation that someone have versus reality in the job from day one, but also in the job after 6 months. What happened in those 6 months? I can't really give an answer on that one, but the only thing that we see in data is that it's a huge line going up that people are dropping off in the first 2 years, and that's for definitely for people under 30. Yeah, a huge thing for us, because if you're only for 2 years in a role, uh, you know the team, you know the location, you know your work, and then you're leaving again. What makes a huge impact for the company, for the team, but also again hiring and starting again with fulfilling that vacancy.
Yep. There's one last tricky question that I have to ask you. So I think to summarize, for me, FrieslandCampina is definitely a front runner when it comes to traineeship. I think the way you shifted from purely looking at CVs to potential, I think you definitely did a great job opening up your talent pool more and also devoting yourself to unbiased hiring, which is we've seen it in the research that I showed just now. It's important for Gen Z. So I think you are definitely taking the steps that are necessary in order to make sure that you keep attracting Gen Zs in the first place. Now, what we do see in general, I also see it for other customers, is that the number of applications on traineeships is slowly declining a little bit. Do you think that traineeships will still exist in 10 years' time? Is the concept of traineeships like committing yourself for a longer period of time, going through different parts of the organization? Do you think it's a first job that Gen Zs will still like in a couple of years' time?
To be open, I don't really know. So the funny part here is, I think if you go to, so if we divide it in, unfortunately, in education parts. So if you ask probably master students, probably still get a really high number of people who want to do a traineeship, because if we look at the Rijks, they get a lot of applications. If we look at 10 years ago, that they didn't have that number. I think that the new generation is more, they have more knowledge about what companies are doing. They are more biased on what is a company producing, how are they running the business, work-life balance, culture, etc., etc. It's people want to have a complete picture. Unfortunately, you can't score on each number a 10. So it's a little bit giving and taking there. It's if the culture is a 9 and work-life balance is also a 9, is it then possible to do the job in 32 hours with the same salary of what someone gets for 40 hours? Well, that's a big question, of course. So does it still exist? People who are starting in a traineeship for future leaders? I think so. Does it still go on how we do it, like how we do it now? So our traineeship is actually for master students. However, we are planning to start soon with also bachelor, and potentially even more. So we believe more in developing people from a start to a management position. And we want to take that broader than only master. So that's why we are implementing soon as well a bachelor. And let's see what the future brings there.
Yeah, I think that will be a huge improvement eventually to also I think that education and language are now the two hard criteria you still have. I think eventually getting
That's
rid of
also a big change
education
for
would be
us.
the next one.
Yeah, we are still a traditional company when it comes to language. So a huge shift and change. If we look only in our team, I think from next month on, we have finally five different nationalities, where I'm really proud of, because that's also something that the business need to change. And it's also from bias recruitment is we just launched, we call it license to recruit. That's one way of working in a framework for hiring managers that they haven't handhold and handbook to recruit. And we want to upscale that with unbiased recruitment in this quarter to train people really like, but if you ask this question of you, or if you take this out of a CV, it could harm a candidate, it could harm the process, but also FrieslandCampina as a company, because you never know what someone else thinks about the question that you ask. So be aware of what you ask and how you do it.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, the last one, because I don't know if this was scheduled actually for 30 minutes or 45, but we do have a last question in the chat, so I do want to ask it still to you. Tim asked, what are candidates saying now about the fact that you don't ask for CV anymore? But yeah, you didn't do it yet, so I think you don't have those insights already, right?
No, we don't have. So we're going to start with the upcoming. So the vacancies and everything around it, the campaigns are going live next month, so soon, and then we will show on the website of the application process what are the exact steps. And well, we probably will know somewhere in June, July what the outcome will be, because then the selection ends. So we don't have the data yet, but I think if we do this, we already have a cohort starting. So hopefully in September this year, we can already look back on how people perform and how they are doing. So yeah, we don't really have the hard data yet.
What might be interesting to share is that we do collect those kinds of insights with our candidates. We every now and then ask candidates to complete surveys and those kinds of things. What I found super interesting, so what we also do, for example, is when people complete our game-based assessments, every candidate has, of course, the opportunity to leave feedback and ratings. You have that too for FrieslandCampina. So we have that on company level, but we also have it, of course, for all of our customers combined. And what I found very interesting to see is that we get higher ratings from all the different, I hate the word minority groups, but I have no better word for it. But for all the minority groups, we always get better ratings when we ask them, like, did you enjoy the game-based assessments being the first step? So like white people give the lowest rating, men give lower than females, people from in the age where you're sort of in the middle of your career give lower ratings than people that are 50 plus. So my assumption would be that if you get rid of the resume in a recruitment process, that the ones who would tick all the boxes based on a resume would give you more negative comments than the ones who don't.
Fully agree. Yeah.
All right. I'm sorry, Dennis, for going over time. I hope you still have some time to. I hope you still have some time to lunch, because every time I'm in a call with you, you still have to lunch.
I'll talk. Thanks.
Thanks so much for being here today, and for everyone who's listening. If you do have any follow-up questions, Kat, my colleague, just posted a link to our Breaking Bias community. It's an online community that you can sign up for. It's free, where you can have discussions with people. So you can also leave your questions for this webinar specifically. And Dennis, again, a big thanks for joining. And I see you soon. Have a great day, everyone.
I enjoyed the day. Bye.